Thanks for joining us, folks, on another episode of This Sea Ranch Life. As many of you are aware, we finished our elections for the Board of Directors. Today, we're going to be talking to the two candidates who were elected, Elisabeth Watson and Paul Plakos, and we'll hear a little bit about their thoughts moving forward and working with the board. Thanks to both of you. Thanks, Elisabeth. Thanks, Paul, for joining today.
Thanks, George.
Let's dive right in with the first question. Paul, let me direct to you, and then Elisabeth, you can follow up with your own answer. Paul, this is a general question about the board. Would you characterize your own approach to working with the board, to doing things like solving problems and making decisions? Your approach to that?
Yeah, my approach, which I've said before during the campaign, is really to listen and be curious. And curiosity and clarifying, I think, is really important, because if we don't clarify somebody's position, we can get way down the line and all of a sudden discover that we're not quite understanding the position at all. So to really have really good dialogue in that respect. And as it relates to problem solving, I am a proponent of really understanding the upside and the downside of each position. And hopefully even somebody who presents the upside of a position, hopefully they can also present the downside of their own position. If they don't, then I'm a little skeptical, that they really thought about this at all. The problem in decision making, by only looking at your upside and the other person's downside, is that if you make that decision based upon your upside, eventually, after the decision's made, the other person's upside starts to creep in and your own downside starts to creep in. So it's my experience is it's best to really do a real thorough exploration of all positions first.
Fantastic. Elisabeth, would you comment on that same question, your approach to working with the board, problem solving, and decision making?
Absolutely. I think we just saw why it's a wonderful thing that Paul Plakos is our newest director. I think that's a fantastic point. And also thank you for doing this, George. Also, as I've said before, I definitely work with data and analysis, and we like to base our decisions in factual information to the extent possible. However, that's never the entire picture. Members have opinions and they have needs and values, and those we actually have to hear. In terms of just working with the board, I think one of the things that is one of our biggest assets is that we have 7 uniquely talented, truly committed people on this board with different perspectives, different histories, different length of tenure on the Sea Ranch, and most importantly, different skills that are very highly complementary to each other. And I think any process that we undertake as a board really has to leverage that. I mean, I think that's one of the, and then, frankly, I also think it's one of the most rewarding things about board service is the opportunity to work with people who care as deeply as we all do about the Sea Ranch, but bring such a different set of perspectives and skills to the process. So I think anything I can do to ensure that we are leveraging and hearing from each of the 7 of us when that's the appropriate phase of the discussion, when we're making a decision, is the best thing to do. And then I would also say that, I've talked about this on the campaign, and I still think it's important, and I'm starting to put the elements of a task force together. I do think that a framework for handling conflict that would be an opportunity, not a requirement, but an opportunity for any Sea Ranch committee or body to use when looking at controversial topics would be helpful. And we've got some really interesting people willing to help on that. I'd like to see, I do want to see that move forward. Other than that, we make decisions in the open, other than those very few that we cannot. And we encourage member participation to the greatest extent possible, because that's where the great ideas come from.
Thanks, Elisabeth. Let's turn to one of the issues that's going to come up for this next board, technically a new board, and that's the fuels management plan. This was examined quite a bit over the past year. There are still some components to the fuels management plan that are going to require a decision that'll ultimately come to the board. Talk to me about how you're going to approach the fuels management plan. If you care to share a position or something, you're certainly free to, but I'm really interested in your approach. How are you going to make the decisions about the fuels management plan, which is something of tremendous interest to almost all members? Elisabeth, let's start with you.
Sure. I think our priorities for the fuels management plan, and for that matter, any other decision that we make, are clearly first safety for the membership itself and our environment and property preservation. I think those are the central goals of any effective fuels management plan. So I think establishing the criteria that we would use to evaluate anything and agreeing to that criteria, or at least agreeing to what we each understand that criteria to be, is important. Past that, I think the opportunity to be as factual as possible about what the implications of any decision we make around fuels management is a great idea. I love it that we are going out into the woods to walk the trail and look at the fuel break and let people see what it could actually mean. I think that specific information is going to be really critical to getting good input and also critical to making our decisions. And then lastly, I would say that there's an element of this that's always an undercurrent of any decision we make, and that's our fiduciary responsibility. And that relates particular to insurability. I think the State Farm decision to exit the California market to the extent they're allowed to by law is indication of the seriousness of the insurability issue. And our job, as among many other things, but primarily, is to preserve the values of our homes. And if we lose our insurability, we have to take that into consideration.
Yeah, let me jump in for our viewers who may not have heard about this. I believe it was yesterday that State Farm Insurance announced that they would no longer be writing homeowners policies for properties in the state of California. My understanding is the existing policies that they have, they'll continue to honor, but they're not going to write any new policies, and that could potentially impact homeowners here at the Sea Ranch. Paul, would you comment on your approach to the fuels management plan?
Sure. I think there's agreement with virtually, well, most of the FMP. Couple of outstanding issues are roadside fuel breaks. Right now, just to get down to the nuts and bolts of it, since 2002, we could, on a roadside fuel break on the downslope side of the road, we've had 100-foot shaded fuel break. On the upside of the road, 30-foot shaded fuel break. And the proposal is to make it 100 feet on both sides. This can sound pretty scary to people. And so, like Elisabeth was saying, I think there's going to be tremendous benefit. And in walking, just get in the field, boots on the ground, take a look at what we've been doing since 2002. Shaded fuel break, to really get down to the operative word of shaded, we're talking about understory, and to take a look at how things have been cleared below, not the trees, but ladder fuels that can take fire from the ground up into the trees. People need to be able to see it, feel it, be right out there. So I think being able to do these walks that are going to occur is going to be very helpful for everyone involved. And then, in the approach that I would also take, besides those wonderful field events that we're going to do, to be able to understand the positions from experts. And when I say experts, there's experts with studies, there's experts with true experience, and taking all of that and gathering it together and to say what makes sense for us. Again, I have to say there's not going to be logging. There's not going to be destruction of the canopy. We're not putting a swath through the central, there's no proposal through the CTPZ. We're talking about basically some, as Elisabeth was saying, safety. And let's try and make us as safe as possible.
Thank you, Paul. And once again, to our viewers, and you might look at viewers should look at the association website. There are, I believe, 2 walkthroughs scheduled in the month of June that any member can come and join and learn, walk along the area of the proposed shaded fuel break, ask questions, look at it, and just become more educated or more knowledgeable about what those might actually be. Let's turn to another topic that has been hot in the past, and I think will be again, and that's our airstrip here at the Sea Ranch. Once again, the past board looked at some rule changes to the airstrip, and I don't know how many rules have been adopted at this point. There are certainly some still out there, and regarding changes about the use and operations of the airstrip. Once again, how would you approach this discussion about the Sea Ranch airstrip? Paul, why don't you start here?
Sure. Well, my interest is essentially in the data, and I'd like to understand, what is actually going on, and if we can quantify it, and I'd really appreciate that. It would help me in making the decision. I also have an interest in the history of the airstrip and the history of this particular issue now. I want to know why now. What has happened? What has occurred in the last year or 2 or 3, whatever period of time it is, that we've gotten to this place? So a little bit of history is going to help me in making a decision. And then, are we focused on the problem, based upon the data and the history, and how do we mitigate that, that issue? And of course, hopefully planning is going to come forward, and the association is going to come forward with a lot of great information that the board can use to make a decision.
Elisabeth, same question for you. How about that airstrip? How will you approach any possible rule changes?
I spent a good amount of time in my second statement using it as an example of my decision-making thinking, and also the complexity that underlies nearly anything we face. I mean, if it were simple, it wouldn't be a big deal. We just implement a change and that'd be it. It'd be operational, at which point it wouldn't even come to the board. It would be that clear. This one is actually more difficult, I think, on a values level. We have, and the reason why it's a challenging one for me personally is that we have 2 conflicting values that are precious to each of us at Sea Ranch. And one is we preserve our member amenities unless there is an extremely compelling reason not to. And on the other side, we all come here for a peaceful and environmentally sensitive environment. And so far, I think it's been a little difficult to figure out how to navigate that. We are looking for more information from our insurer, as well as an attorney that will help us. And then, but when it comes time to make decisions on what we do or don't do, first and foremost, again, make sure that we're safe. It is an airstrip. And then secondly, what can we do to preserve member amenities and rights while finding some form of compromise? One of the things that came to me when I talked to various people about this was that I think probably some of the issues are going to get resolved by the neighbors. If we can have time and the pilots, if we can find an opportunity for these people to sit down and talk to each other, both of which have expressed to me, not every single one, obviously, but the ones I've talked to, that they'd be very willing to do so. And I think and actually when I've talked to them individually, they're not really terribly far apart. I think everyone wants to be neighborly. I think everybody wants to find something that works for everyone. And we may wind up with a solution to this, or at least something we can live with, that is as much based on an open communication process and a respect and understanding of our fellow sea ranchers as much as a rule change. But we still have more to learn. So we're not there yet.
Thank you. Last topic I'm going to bring up. During our budgeting process this past year, which from my vantage point went considerably smoother than it has in the previous year or two. One of the things that caught a lot of folks' attention is that our fees, our monthly fees that we pay to operate and maintain the Sea Ranch, took a jump up. In some folks' opinion, it was too big of a jump. In other people's opinions, it was a jump that had to be made for a variety of reasons. Once again, setting monthly fees is another complex issue, and a lot of factors come into play. But I'd like to ask each of you to comment on the budgeting process, and then address, say something about the fees and how you'd approach that, given where we've been in the last year or two. Elisabeth, if you would begin.
Sure. Yeah, I thought the budget process this year was fairly smooth. I think probably the biggest thing that Menka has talked about doing, which I think is a great idea, is to start it sooner. Because for folks that aren't very familiar with the process, we typically look at the costs associated with providing the levels of service that we currently have. And then we look at things, we call them budget options, but they're things that we think would be perhaps an augment to services or something that preserves the value of what we have. So one example this year, for example, was heat pumps at the pools, which has an environmental component as well as a cost savings component. And so as we look at those options, sometimes we need more time to get more information. So the fact that Menka wants to look at all of the projects that come before us and all the great ideas, because as we all know, sea ranchers aren't short of those, that we have time to really evaluate each option and really look at them. Because now you've also heard me say that we're very good at our long-term stuff. The 30-year plan, which is a reserve study, we approved that this year. We update it every 3 years. That maintains and replaces our capital assets and equipment. We're good at that. We're very good, I think, at the 1-year process and understanding what our services are. We're not so good at the medium-term projects, and we need a better process for prioritizing and understanding what our medium-term projects will look like and how they'll impact our annual budget, which speaks to your second question, is what can we expect to happen with dues? This year, we don't really have any particular projects that are of that nature, and that's for the simple reason that the increase in the dues to the tune of, I believe, $19 has to do with storm damage cleanup and prevention of falling trees. That's just not an option. Some years, that's what's going to be what we're going to have to focus on. And that is a component of the dues. The second thing that was a part of the dues this year was changes in the carryover related to the ending of COVID relief. So I've waxed on this eternally. Any member can write to me. I have, many of you have, and thank you. I have some detailed explanations of the impact on this year's dues. The question going forward, there are several. One is, what's it going to cost to preserve the amenities we provide to the membership now? And I think that's always a starting point. What projects might we consider? And then also, what do we need to do today to ensure that our future is secure as well? So that's some of the decisions we always have to make. My experience as a sea rancher of nearly 11 years is that we're pretty good at not kicking the can down the road, but there's a few things that we need to revisit every year. The last thing I'll say about the process, which I found enlightening, is that there are times when we seem to ask the same questions every year, and there's times when that can feel a bit frustrating. But it's asking those questions and that in member engagement that surfaces things that we need to think about. So I very much appreciate that our process does not just say, let's just assume everything is the way it is. Let's really look at what we do and what we pay for within the context of preserving the things about the Sea Ranch that make it such a special place to live. And I always appreciate that process, even if occasionally it can be a little like, oh, we're going to be here for another 5 hours. But I think the fact that we really take the time to ask those questions and really dig into it is one of the biggest assets we have, both as a community and as a set of board of directors.
Paul, comment on the budgeting process and HOA fees.
Sure. Well, I have to agree with Elisabeth. I thought the budget process for this last year, developing this current year's fiscal budget, was good, but we can make it better. And the community manager has, already put some, taken some steps to make it better by looking at options and doing the analysis earlier on. In the past, it didn't mean that, options were only developed in October, November, December. Those items were identified, but perhaps the analysis and really costing them out wasn't done until later. So it'd be nice to enter the actual budget season, if there is a season, with those optional items already costed out. As it relates to the cost of the assessment, materials are going to keep going up in price. We have to pay our staff fairly, compensate them. So yeah, in that respect, some things are going to increase. As Elisabeth said, though, $300,000 this year in this current budget goes directly towards mitigating storm damage. If we don't have another storm, there's $200,000-300,000 that you're not going to see in the next budget, which is terrific. We want to make sure that, we pay close attention to our costs. And I'm sure the association and the board is going to be watching those things very closely. And, how can we offset some of the increases in materials and staff? How can we offset that with revenue opportunities? And everybody's still looking at revenue opportunities, no matter how small they are. But to keep in mind, we're an HOA, we're not a revenue-driven corporation. If we can find some revenue, terrific. And finally, and Elisabeth and I, during the campaign, we were educating a lot of folks on what a carryover is, right? and a lot of it depends on the carryover, which means, can we stay within budget this year? Can we come under the budget this year? And if that's possible, then we have a nice carryover in revenue for the following year. If things happen and we spend most of what we've budgeted or more than what we've budgeted, hopefully not, then the carryover would be very small, and then unfortunately the assessment does go up. So there's a lot of factors that everybody has to keep their eye on in order for the assessment to stay where it is or increase as little as possible.
Thanks, Paul. For our viewers, you've just been hearing from Elisabeth Watson and Paul Plakos, who were recently elected to our board of directors. They've been talking about their approach to several different issues. Elisabeth and Paul, I do want to thank you for taking the time with me today, and best of luck to both of you, and we'll look for you at the future board meetings.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, George. Always a pleasure. We appreciate it.